Why does every ancient civilization point to the sky? In the blue silence before dawn, when the world still held its breath, and the last stars trembled at the edge of fading, someone looked up. A figure wrapped in hide or woven grass, standing on earth that had cooled for billions of years, lifted their gaze toward a canopy of distant light. The same gesture would be repeated across every continent, in every age, by every people who ever walked beneath the turning wheel of heaven. They did not know each other's names or languages or gods, and yet they all pointed to the same place. Above the savannas where humanity first wandered, above the river valleys where cities rose like slow-blooming flowers, above the frozen tundras and the humid jungles and the wind-swept islands scattered across endless seas, the sky remained. It was the one constant in a world of change, the single canvas that every culture shared. And something in that shared seeing bound them together across oceans of time, whispering a question none of them could answer. But all of them asked, what lives up there in that luminous darkness? The constellations drifted through their ancient choreography, indifferent to the small lives watching from below. Stars were born and died in furnaces of unimaginable heat, their light traveling for thousands of years before arriving at a human eye. The moon waxed and waned like a breath, a slow pulse marking the rhythm of tides and ceremonies and harvests. Planets wandered among the fixed stars, tracing paths that seemed to hold meaning for those patient enough to follow their journeys across decades and generations. The sky was never empty. It hummed with stories waiting to be told, with patterns waiting to be named, with presences that seemed to watch back. The Egyptians saw their gods sailing through rivers of night. The Maya traced the movements of Venus with a precision that still astonishes astronomers today. The builders of Stonehenge aligned massive stones with the solstice sun, creating a calendar written in rock and shadow. In China, in Mesopotamia, in the Andes and the Australian outback and the islands of the Pacific, people carved their observations into bone and clay and stone, preserving what they saw for generations yet unborn. The methods differed, the names changed, the myths wrapped themselves in local color and texture, but the impulse remained the same, as universal as hunger or love or grief. Every ancient civilization, without exception, devoted enormous resources and attention to understanding the sky. They built observatories and temples aligned with celestial events. They developed calendars of astonishing sophistication. They wove the movements of sun and moon and stars into the very fabric of their cultures, their religions, their sense of who they were and where they belonged in the vast architecture of existence. Perhaps the question is not why they looked up, but how they could have done otherwise. The sky was their first teacher, their most reliable clock, their grandest mystery. It promised both order and transcendence, patterns that could be learned and depths that could never be fully sounded. It was the one thing larger than any empire, older than any dynasty, more enduring than any monument raised by human hands. Dawn softens the horizon now, pale gold, bleeding into rose. The first light of morning touches the same stones where ancient astronomers once stood, the same hills and valleys and plains where eyes first turned heavenward and found, instead of emptiness, a universe of meaning waiting to be read. The continuity is almost unbearable in its gentleness, this quiet persistence of the questioning gaze, this unbroken thread of wonder stretching from the earliest campfires to this present moment. And so they pointed, and so they wondered. Most archaeologists and historians agree that systematic skywatching emerged independently in numerous cultures between roughly 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, during the transition from nomadic hunting to settled agriculture. This period, sometimes called the Neolithic Revolution, brought with it a new relationship with time. Farmers needed to know when to plant and when to harvest, when the rains would come and when the floods would recede. The sky became not just a source of wonder, but a practical necessity, a calendar written in the movements of celestial bodies. Evidence suggests that some of the earliest astronomical observations were recorded in notches carved into bone and antler, perhaps as early as 30,000 years ago. These lunar tallies, as researchers sometimes call them, appear to track the phases of the moon across multiple cycles. While scholars continue to debate their exact purpose, the pattern of marks corresponds remarkably well to lunar months, suggesting that even our distant ancestors were paying careful attention to the rhythms of the night sky. By the time the great civilizations of the ancient world rose along the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus and the Yellow River, astronomical knowledge had become sophisticated and systematic. Babylonian astronomers, working in what is now Iraq, developed mathematical models capable of predicting lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy. Their clay tablets, preserved for over 3,000 years, reveal a dedication to observation spanning centuries, with records passed carefully from one generation of scholars to the next. Time became a river they could navigate. The Egyptians oriented their pyramids and temples with extraordinary precision to cardinal directions and specific stellar events. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns with true north to within a small fraction of a degree, an achievement that required both astronomical observation and surveying techniques of considerable refinement. Some researchers propose that the arrangement of the three Giza pyramids mirrors the stars of Orion's belt, though this interpretation remains debated among Egyptologists. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, civilizations were developing their own astronomical traditions with equal sophistication. The Maya of Central America created calendar systems of remarkable complexity, tracking cycles within cycles that extended thousands of years into past and future. Their observations of Venus were so precise that modern astronomers have verified their accuracy. The Dresden Codex, one of the few Maya manuscripts to survive the Spanish conquest, contains eclipse tables that remain valid today. In Northern Europe, where written records came later, the evidence lies in stone. Stonehenge, constructed over a period spanning roughly 1,500 years, aligns with the summer and winter solstices in ways that cannot be coincidental. Similar alignments appear at hundreds of megalithic sites across Britain, Ireland, and the European continent. These monuments required enormous investments of labor and organization, suggesting that their astronomical functions held deep significance for the communities that built them. The precision of ancient astronomical observations often surprises modern researchers. Without telescopes, without written mathematics as we know it, without any of the tools we take for granted, these early astronomers achieved results that remained unmatched for millennia. They tracked the subtle wobble of Earth's axis, a cycle taking roughly 26,000 years to complete. They identified the slow drift of planetary positions through the zodiac. They calculated the length of the year to within minutes of modern measurements. Patience was their telescope. What made this possible was not superior intelligence, but cumulative observation across generations. A single astronomer watching for a lifetime might notice only fragments of the larger patterns, but cultures that preserved their observations, passing knowledge from teacher to student across centuries, could accumulate data that revealed cycles far longer than any individual life. The sky became a text that required many lifetimes to read, and the civilizations that invested in this slow reading reaped practical rewards alongside the spiritual insights their observations provided. Yet for all their precision in tracking what the sky did, ancient astronomers could not know what the sky was. They observed the movements of planets without knowing those wandering lights were worlds like their own. They watched meteors streak across the night without understanding they were witnessing debris from the early formation of the solar system. They saw the pale band of the Milky Way without grasping that they were looking at the combined light of billions of distant suns. The mechanics they mastered so thoroughly floated on mysteries they could not resolve. And perhaps that is why, beyond all practical considerations, they kept looking up. The sky offered patterns that could be learned, yes, but it also offered depths that could not be exhausted. It was reliable enough to serve as calendar and compass, yet strange enough to remain forever new. Every answer revealed new questions. Every cycle contained variations. Every certainty floated in a sea of wonder that no amount of observation could drain. Noon holds steady now over green water and sleeping stone. The zenith sun that ancient peoples tracked so carefully still crosses the meridian at its appointed time, indifferent to the civilizations that have risen and fallen beneath its arc. The same shadow that marked the solstice at Newgrange 5,000 years ago still falls today, a finger of light reaching into the dark chamber to touch the same carved spirals that waited there through all the intervening centuries. In Australia, the Aboriginal peoples developed one of the oldest continuous astronomical traditions on Earth, reading the night sky for practical information about seasons and navigation, while also finding there the dwelling places of ancestors and the maps of songlines that crisscrossed the continent. In the Americas, the ancestral Puebloans constructed buildings aligned with solstices and lunar standstills, their architecture a dialogue with the cosmos that continues to speak to anyone patient enough to listen. On the steppes of Central Asia, nomads who left few permanent structures nonetheless carried with them a sophisticated knowledge of the stars, using the night sky as a compass across landscapes without other landmarks. Scientists believe that the human brain evolved its remarkable capacity for pattern recognition, partly in response to the challenges of survival on the African savanna. Detecting the faint outline of a predator in tall grass, reading the signs of weather in cloud formations, tracking the seasonal movements of game herds, all required an ability to find meaningful patterns amid the chaos of sensory information. This same cognitive machinery, some researchers propose, may have predisposed us to find patterns in the sky as well, to seek order in the wheeling chaos of stars. Some studies suggest that the human visual system is particularly attuned to certain configurations of light against darkness. We see faces in random arrangements, figures in clouds, shapes in the scatter of stars. This tendency, sometimes called pareidolia, may have encouraged early skywatchers to group stars into constellations, to see hunters and bears and serpents outlined against the night. The patterns they found were not illusions exactly, but neither were they simply there, waiting to be discovered. They emerged from the meeting of human perception and celestial arrangement, a collaboration between mind and cosmos. We shaped what we saw. Beyond what the data can show, it may be that the very act of looking up triggered something deep in the architecture of consciousness. The sky is one of the few places where the eye can travel without obstruction, where the gaze can extend beyond all familiar scales into distances that have no end. Perhaps this experience of infinite depth opened neural pathways that had no other occasion to fire, awakened capacities that had no other trigger. Perhaps the sky taught us to think thoughts larger than our immediate circumstances, to conceive of time beyond our lifetimes, to imagine ourselves as part of something vaster than any earthly horizon. The myths that emerged from skywatching share curious similarities across cultures that had no contact with one another. Stories of celestial creators, of cosmic battles between light and darkness, of spirits or ancestors dwelling among the stars, appear in traditions separated by oceans and millennia. Some scholars argue that these parallels reflect universal features of human psychology, the same cognitive structures producing similar stories when presented with similar stimuli. Others suggest that certain astronomical events, comets or eclipses, or the conjunction of bright planets, may have inspired myths that spread through trade and migration more widely than we once assumed. And there are stranger resonances still. The number 7 appears with notable frequency in astronomical traditions worldwide, associated with the visible planets, with groups of stars, with cycles of time. The serpent, or dragon, often linked to eclipses and cosmic upheaval, coils through mythologies from China to Mexico to Scandinavia. The Milky Way serves as a road for souls, or a river of light in traditions spanning Africa, the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific. Whether these echoes reflect deep cognitive templates, ancient contacts now forgotten, or simply the natural shapes that meaning takes when humans confront the same celestial phenomena, remains an open question. The patterns kept returning. It may be more honest to imagine our ancestors not simply observing the sky, but entering into relationship with it. The boundary between watcher and watched, between observer and observed, may have been far more permeable in their experience than in ours. When the Egyptians saw the constellation Orion as Osiris, Lord of the Dead and Resurrection, they were not decorating the sky with arbitrary labels. They were recognizing a presence, acknowledging a power, participating in a reality that included both the visible patterns of stars and the invisible forces those patterns embodied. This mode of perception, sometimes called participatory consciousness, saw the cosmos not as a collection of objects to be studied, but as a web of meanings to be inhabited. The movements of planets were not mere mechanics, but communications, messages from powers whose intentions mattered for human affairs. The rising of certain stars at certain seasons was not coincidence, but coordination, a cosmic calendar that bound heaven and earth in mutual responsibility. To track the sky was not simply to gather information, but to maintain a relationship, to hold up the human end of a conversation with the divine. Perhaps the earth itself remembers. In some sense, we have not yet learned to read the weight of all those watching eyes. Across hundreds of thousands of years, on every continent where humans walked, faces turned upward in the darkness, minds open to receive whatever the sky might offer. Generation after generation, culture after culture, the same gesture repeated until it became as natural as breathing, as fundamental as the beating of the heart. If stone can hold an impression, if water can carry a memory, then perhaps the planet keeps some trace of all that accumulated attention, all that wondering, all that longing. The same wind now carries starlight instead of questions, and the sky itself, indifferent or responsive, continued its ancient rotations. Stars that had burned since before the earth formed kept sending their light across the void. Galaxies that contained more suns than all the grains of sand on all the beaches of the world went on wheeling in their incomprehensible journeys. Whether anyone watched or no one watched, the cosmos proceeded according to its own deep logic, patient as geology, vast as thought extended to infinity. Yet perhaps the watching mattered in ways we cannot measure. Perhaps attention is itself a kind of force, a thread woven into the fabric of what is. Perhaps the universe that is observed is subtly different from the universe that is not, changed somehow by the fact of being witnessed. Quantum physics hints at stranger connections than this, at observers and observations entangled in ways that defy common sense. If the very small can behave in such surprising ways, who can say with certainty what the very large might do? Dusk settles over the ledger of stone and sand, where ancient records still sleep. The light shifts from gold to amber to purple, the same gradual dimming that signaled to our ancestors the arrival of the hours when stars would speak. In temples and observatories, on hilltops and at the edges of lakes where the sky doubled itself in reflection, they would have gathered now, these watchers of the celestial clock, preparing for the night's slow revelations. When stone forgets its shape, when mountains melt back into the restless mantle from which they rose, when rivers change their courses and seas swallow the lands where temples once stood, what remains of all that watching? The observers have returned to dust, their bones scattered and dissolved, their names forgotten except where carved in rock or preserved in texts copied across centuries. The civilizations they built have crumbled, their grandest monuments reduced to ruins that hint at glories now beyond recovery. Even the constellations they named are slowly shifting, the familiar patterns stretching and distorting as stars drift apart over hundreds of thousands of years. And yet something persists. The questions they asked still echo in our own asking. The wonder they felt still stirs when we step outside on a clear night and let our eyes adjust to the dark. We are made of the same atoms that made them, forged in the same stellar furnaces whose light they watched without knowing what they saw. The carbon in our bones, the iron in our blood, the calcium in our teeth, all of it drifted down from dying stars before the earth existed, before there was anywhere for it to fall. We are their children. We are stardust remembering. The same sky arches overhead, changed, and yet the same. New stars have been born in the intervening millennia. Old ones have dimmed or vanished entirely. Supernovae have flared and faded. Comets have traced their long ellipses through the outer darkness and returned or failed to return, lost to the gravitational tugs of passing bodies. The universe has continued its expansion, carrying galaxies apart from one another at speeds that will eventually push them beyond the reach of any telescope, any journey, any communication. The night sky of the far future will be darker, emptier than anything our ancestors or we have known. But for now, for this brief window of cosmic time, we can still see. The light that left Andromeda 2 million years ago still reaches us, carrying news from an age when our ancestors were first learning to chip stone into tools. The light from the Orion Nebula, where new stars are being born right now, travels for about 1,300 years before arriving at our eyes. When we look at the night sky, we are not seeing the present but the past, 1,000 different pasts layered on top of one another according to distance. A temporal archaeology written in photons. Oceans rose, continents wandered, time kept breathing. The ice came and went again, sculpting new landscapes with each retreat. Species emerged and flourished and disappeared, their bones settling into sediment that would become stone, their stories ending without anyone to tell them. Through all of it, through the extinctions and the proliferations, through the catastrophes and the recoveries, something kept looking up. First, the compound eyes of creatures that lived before there was land to walk on, watching for shadows that might mean predators. Then the eyes of fish, and then of amphibians, and then of reptiles, and mammals, and finally of primates, who would one day call themselves human. The watching is older than we are. Perhaps that is the deepest truth that every ancient civilization intuited when they pointed to the sky. We are not strangers here, not visitors from somewhere else, not accidents of chemistry that happened to develop consciousness. We grew from this planet like flowers from soil, expressions of the same creative force that shaped the stars and set them spinning. The same laws that govern the movements of galaxies govern the firing of neurons in our brains. The same patterns that structure the cosmos structure our perception of it. When we look up, we are the universe looking at itself, the cosmos wondering about its own nature. And that looking is not a cold analysis, not a detached observation from outside. It carries with it all the warmth of being alive, all the tenderness of creatures who know they will not live forever, all the awe of minds confronting something so much larger than themselves. When the ancient ones pointed to the sky, they were not just gathering data or making calendars or populating the darkness with gods. They were expressing something essential about what it means to be human, to be aware, to be here for this brief moment in the long story of the cosmos, and to feel, despite everything, that the story includes us. There is comfort in this continuity, a gentle reassurance that transcends the particulars of any single life or civilization. Whatever else changes, whatever empires rise and fall, whatever knowledge is gained or lost, the fundamental relationship remains. The sky above, the earth below, and between them, the watching presence of consciousness, looking up from its brief home to wonder at what lies beyond. This trinity has persisted for as long as there have been minds capable of wonder, and will persist, perhaps, for as long as such minds continue to arise from the patient workings of the cosmos. Stone by stone, breath by breath, age by age. The night deepens now, settling over the world like a held breath. The last colors fade from the western horizon, and the stars emerge one by one from the darkening blue, shy as deer stepping into a clearing. They are the same stars that shone over Babylon and Egypt, over Angkor Wat and Machu Picchu, over the camps of nameless wanderers who left no monuments but their presence in the long chain of generations that leads to us. The questions they asked still hover in the darkness, unanswered and unanswerable, as fresh as they were 10,000 years ago. Why does beauty move us? Why does the vast make us feel both small and somehow larger? Why, when we look at the stars, do we feel that we are looking at something that knows us, even though we know that stars are only burning gas, only light from long ago, only the physics of gravity and fusion doing what physics has always done? The sky holds no answers, only patience. Somewhere beneath these same stars, someone is looking up right now. A child seeing the Milky Way for the first time. A sailor navigating by constellations, as mariners have done for thousands of years. An astronomer peering through a telescope at galaxies so distant that their light has been traveling since before the Earth existed. A person who cannot sleep, stepping outside for air and finding instead a sky so vast, so old, so patient, that their worries seem to dissolve into it like salt into water. The pointing continues, the wondering persists. Generation after generation, the same gesture, the same question, the same opening of the self to something larger than the self. It was never about finding answers. It was about the asking itself, the willingness to face the unknown without flinching, the courage to feel small and to find in that smallness not despair but belonging. The stars do not explain themselves. They simply shine, as they have shone for billions of years, as they will shine for billions more. And somewhere in the space between their light and our eyes, between the firing of ancient photons and the firing of fragile neurons, something happens that has no name, something that every ancient civilization knew, something that we still know when we pause long enough to remember. The night is deep now, full dark, the kind of darkness our ancestors knew well, but that we rarely experience in our illuminated age. Yet even in cities blazing with artificial light, the brightest stars still penetrate, still reach down from their enormous distances to touch human eyes. Somewhere above the glow of street lamps and neon signs, the same constellations that guided ancient mariners still wheel through their eternal dance, patient and unhurried, waiting for anyone who remembers to look up. We are here. We are looking. The universe breathes, and we breathe with it. The light fades. Sleep now.